My name is Diana Reeves. I am 34 years old, a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm, and the sole owner of a 3-bedroom house on Birchwood Lane that I bought at 28 with money I saved entirely by myself. I want to start there because everything that happened begins with that fact. The house was mine before Connor was mine. Before the wedding, before the shared last name, before any of it. 6 years of skipped vacations, packed lunches, and a savings account I checked every Sunday morning like a prayer. The day I got the keys, I sat on the empty living room floor and ate a gas station sandwich and felt more proud of myself than I had ever felt in my life. Connor moved in after the wedding. His name was never added to the deed, not because I didn't trust him, because the mortgage was in my name, the history was in my name, and he never asked. He understood, in the quiet way that good people understand things, that some things belong to a person before they belong to a marriage. His mother, Margaret, did not share that understanding. Margaret Holt was the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately began improving it. She had opinions about furniture placement, grocery brands, the correct way to fold towels, and the inefficiency of keeping a home office when there was a perfectly good guest room going unused. She delivered these opinions with a warmth that made them difficult to argue with, which I think was entirely intentional. She and Connor's father, Bernard, lived 90 minutes away. They visited 4 or 5 times a year. Each visit, Margaret would find something to rearrange, some small thing she could point to as evidence of her contribution. A vase moved from one shelf to another, pantry items reorganized by height. Throw pillows switched between sofas. I mentioned it to Connor once, early on. He apologized. He told her once, gently. She stopped for about 2 months and then resumed, more subtly. We settled into a kind of unspoken management of the situation. She was not malicious, I told myself. She simply could not stop herself from treating spaces as problems to be solved. I did not understand until February exactly how far that instinct went. I had been having pain on my left side for about 6 weeks. My doctor ordered an ultrasound, then an MRI, then a conversation that used words like mass and laparoscopic and monitored recovery. The mass was not cancerous. The surgery was precautionary but necessary. I would need 2 nights in the hospital and 4 to 6 weeks of limited activity afterward. Connor took the day off. He was with me from 5 in the morning when we arrived at the hospital, through the pre-op waiting, until they wheeled me through the doors. He kissed my forehead. He told me he would be there when I woke up. He was there when I woke up. What he did not mention, while I was still trying to remember my own name in the recovery room, was that he had called his parents from the waiting room during my surgery, and that they had immediately gotten in the car, and that he had told them where the spare key was kept. I had installed the security system 2 years earlier after a break-in 2 streets over. 6 cameras total: front door, back door, driveway, kitchen, living room, upstairs hallway, motion activated, connected to an app on my phone. When Connor handed my phone back to me in the recovery room, I had 61 notifications waiting. I assumed it was work emails and get well messages. I opened the app out of habit, because I always check it when I have been away from the house. The first clip was time-stamped during my surgery. Margaret walking through my front door with a rolling suitcase, Bernard behind her. Connor opening the door for them, hugging his mother, pointing toward the kitchen. I watched 3 clips lying in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm. Then I put the phone face down and stared at the ceiling for a while. Connor came in with a cup of tea. "Your parents are at the house," I said. "Mom wanted to be there when you got home," he said. "She thought it would help to have someone handle things while you're recovering." "How long are they planning to stay?" He sat down slowly. "She mentioned a few weeks." I did not say anything else that night. I was tired and medicated and not yet ready to say what I was actually thinking, which was that nobody had asked me, and that my house was not a place where decisions were made without me, regardless of my physical location at the time. I was discharged the next afternoon. Connor drove. Margaret met us at the front door with the specific energy of someone who has been busy and wants you to notice. She had made soup. She had put fresh flowers on the kitchen table. She had also, I noticed immediately, rearranged the living room. The armchair that sat by the window, the one I had bought before Connor and I met, the one I had specifically chosen for the morning light, had been moved to the opposite wall. The bookshelf had been reorganized. The 3 framed prints I had bought at an outdoor market years ago, which had hung in the hallway since the day I moved in, were gone. "Where are my prints?" I asked. Margaret looked up from the stove. "I put them in the spare room. The hallway felt a bit crowded, and I thought, please put them back today." She paused, smiled. "Of course. I was only trying to make things feel a little more open while you're recovering." "I know," I said. "Please put them back." Bernard looked at his crossword. Connor looked at the floor. Margaret turned back to the stove. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed and opened the camera app again. I watched the full 61 clips over the course of that evening. Most of them were ordinary: Margaret cooking, Bernard watching television, Connor going in and out, but several were not ordinary at all. There was a clip of Margaret in my home office, opening the desk drawers one by one. Slowly, without urgency. The way someone does when they are not looking for something specific, but building a picture of what is there. There was a clip of her standing in the doorway of the master bedroom for almost 4 minutes, looking at the room, not moving, just observing. There was a clip of her on her phone in the living room, gesturing at the walls around her while she spoke, describing the space to someone, showing it in the particular way people do when they want the other person to picture it accurately. And there was a clip from late the first night, just before midnight, of Margaret and Bernard sitting together in my living room after Connor had gone to bed. Margaret had a piece of paper in her hand. She was reading from it. Bernard nodded several times. Margaret tapped the page, folded it, and put it in her cardigan pocket. I watched that clip 4 times. Then I called Sandra. Sandra had handled my house purchase 6 years ago. She answered on the second ring, which told me her number was still in my phone and my phone was still in her contacts. I described everything: the arrival without my permission, the rearranging, the drawer search, the document. Sandra asked me one question before anything else. "Is your husband's name anywhere on the deed or mortgage?" "No," I said. "Then the property is yours in a way that is not complicated by marital status for this purpose. What you're describing, people entering and behaving as though they have decision-making authority over the space, is a problem regardless of their relationship to your husband. I want you to find that document." I found it the next afternoon while Margaret was in the garden and Bernard was asleep in the guest room. It was in her cardigan, which she had left over the kitchen chair. 3 pages, printed, with tidy formatting. It was a proposal for a long-term residency arrangement in which Margaret and Bernard would occupy the guest room on a permanent basis, contributing a fixed monthly amount toward household expenses. The amount was less than 1/3 of the actual costs. At the bottom was a signature line. My name was already printed beneath it. They had driven 90 minutes to my house while I was in surgery and brought a document with my name on it. I photographed all 3 pages on my phone, replaced the document exactly as I had found it, walked upstairs, sat on my bed, and called Sandra back. "I found it," I said. She was quiet for 2 seconds. "All right, do not sign anything, do not confront anyone yet. I am going to send you a letter today that you will give to Connor tonight." The letter Sandra sent was clear and unemotional. It outlined the legal standing of the property, the limits of access that Connor could grant to third parties in a home he did not own, and the specific concern that a document had been prepared with my name on it without my knowledge or consent. I gave it to Connor that night after his parents had gone to bed. He read it at the kitchen table. He read it twice, then he put it down and looked at me. "Did you know about the document?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "She mentioned she had been thinking about a more permanent arrangement," he said. I told her it would have to be something we discussed together. I didn't know she had written anything up, but you knew she was thinking about it. Yes, he said. That was honest. It was also not enough. Connor, I said. They came into this house while I was in surgery. They moved things. She went through my office drawers. She had a document with my name on it before I had any conversation with anyone about any arrangement. I need you to understand that this is not about your parents staying for a few weeks. This is about the fact that decisions were being made about my home without me. He was quiet for a long time after that. Not defensive, just quiet in the way of someone absorbing something they cannot argue with. I'll talk to her in the morning, he said. I'd like to be there, I said. We sat at the kitchen table the next morning, all four of us. Connor had asked his parents to come down before breakfast. Margaret came in looking composed. Bernard looked like he had not slept well. I put my phone on the table and played 4 clips: the office drawers, the bedroom doorway, the phone call where she gestured around the room, the late-night conversation with the document. Margaret watched all 4 without speaking. Bernard looked at his hands. When the clips finished, Margaret said, I was trying to help plan for your recovery. The arrangement would have been practical. You planned it before I was home, I said. You had my name printed on a document that I never agreed to discuss. Family doesn't always need formal agreements. This family does, I said, because this house is mine, not Connor's, not ours jointly, mine, and anything that happens in it or to it goes through me. Margaret looked at Connor. Connor looked back at her in a way that I had not seen before. Steady, not apologetic, not looking for a way to soften what had been said. Mum, he said quietly, Diana is right. Margaret was silent for a moment that stretched long enough to mean something. Then she looked at me. I didn't think of it the way you're describing, she said. I know, I said, but now you do. Bernard and Margaret left the following morning. The prints went back on the hallway wall that same afternoon. Connor hung them himself without being asked. The armchair went back to the window. That small thing, him moving the chair without me saying anything, told me more than the conversation at the kitchen table had. We started counseling 3 weeks later. It was uncomfortable in the way that useful things often are. We talked about the house, about ownership, about the difference between building a life together and absorbing one that already existed. Connor talked about growing up in a family where his mother's certainty was simply the weather, something you moved around rather than challenged. I talked about what it had cost me to build something entirely alone, and how reflexively I protected it. The counselor said something in our 3rd session that stayed with me. She said the problem was not that Margaret wanted to be closer to her son. The problem was that she had treated my house as the vehicle for that want without ever asking whose vehicle it was. That was exactly it. Margaret called me 6 weeks after they left. She did not mention the document. She asked how my recovery was going. She asked if Connor and I had settled back into a normal routine. Then she said, I think I came in too fast. It was not an apology exactly, but it was the first thing she had ever said to me that acknowledged she had done something rather than simply intended something. Yes, I said, you did. I'd like to try again, differently. You're welcome to visit, I said. With notice, for a length of time we agree on in advance. That's what works for me. She said she understood. We have had 2 visits since then. She called ahead both times. She asked before rearranging anything. She has not rearranged anything. Progress, in a family, is often this quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up in the small things: a phone call before arrival, a question before a change, a hand that moves back from something it was reaching for.